So this is our 28th. It's now called Story Cellars. It started as a Love and Time of Corona, and as I've told you before, and actually this concept of wine being a social tool, the first time it actually trigged in my brain was actually when Tyrrel was standing on a table at what's now the Kraal, and he was telling us how important, or lest we forget, that wine is just a social tool that is meant to bring people together, and with a few glasses make us clever. And it's from that, I guess, this whole, hey Tyrrel, this whole thing, my whole philosophy on wine's changed. So that was my philosophy. And
yeah, can I just say something about that, Harry? So I know you're busy with the introduction, but yeah, what I was saying was that wine can be this can become very kind of academic and almost sort of overly intellectual at sometimes. And on the one hand, that makes wine really interesting. It's more than just an alcoholic beverage. But I think sometimes we need to just remind ourselves that at the end of the day, you know, wine is this amazing thing that helps you to can improve your socialization skills. And I'm talking about even if you just have 1 or 2 glasses. I'm not talking about drinking a bottle. And it kind of allows people to connect. It's this sort of glue that brings people together around a table, around a glass, around a bottle. And at the end of the day, you know, that's something that's really important about wine. And I think we just, I don't know, in the industry, we sometimes need to kind of remember, because we often get into a lot of finer detail, which can be a bit boring.
And also it's this thing about it. Well, its purpose or its amazing ability to bring people together is regardless of the price point. You know, you sometimes find people get more academic about wine the more expensive the wine gets. And it shouldn't be the case. It's still the same, still performing the same function. And in our world, it's sometimes even better to get people around and tell stories with a more expensive wine that you've kept for 10 years, because it's an occasion then. And then that's how it started, and Craig sent a picture of wine before lockdown, and they sent it to me, and I often get people sending me pictures of wine saying, Harry, what do you think? And so I started telling the story about the wine, and then it dawned on us, why don't we all go get the same wines, set up a group, and start to tell the stories behind the wines rather than necessarily the acid and the structure and the flavors that come from the wine, because for the majority of people, that's even too much for them. I mean, some people like it, a lot of people do like it, but it doesn't help you when you're sitting in front of a wall of wines, all with similar labels, and you need to make a decision. So you end up going for the one that you bought all the time. Anyway, that's how this all started. We've now done 28. We've had a lot of winemakers on, or wine property owners, and I'm delighted to have Tyrrel on. There's so much. I mean, I don't know where Tyrrel gets the time, and Annetta, who's his wife, she's also on. I don't know where they get the time to do anything. And it's made even worse, because every time I phone Tyrrel to see if we can pop along or we can bring someone, he's always running. He's running Jonkershoek. He's running. So he manages to get in a balanced lifestyle, I believe, with all these ventures. So I met Tyrrel at one of the earlier Spookvein events, which was at Joostenberg, and that was great for me. And we've spoken about Spookvein before, I think, maybe with Sebastian, but 4 guys, 4 winemakers with a wine festival, limited numbers, really telling stories, really getting behind the wines, and then having a dinner afterwards. And for me, that was also an eye-opener, because that was a different way of doing things. And Spookvein, I thought, was spit wine, but my Afrikaans isn't very good, but it's actually brave wines. It was about showcasing wines that you don't ordinarily get, or wines that are brave because, I don't know, maybe they're buck convention or they are trying something different. So, yeah, let's start. I mean, I don't know where you want to start, but maybe right at the beginning, you're 5th generation.
Yeah, so let me start with Joostenberg. So let me just pick up a bottle quickly and show you what it looks like. Oh, there we go. So that's one of our wines. So Joostenberg is a family-owned property, and we are between Stellenbosch and Paarl. The area is called Muldersvlei, and the wine appellation or areas, we're actually part of the Paarl wine area. And my great-great-grandfather bought the property from his father-in-law in the late 1870s. He was the second-born son from Meerlist. So that's kind of where it all started for my family. And there is a lot of history, and we've got a lot of old buildings and a lot of all these things that a lot of kind of the old Cape Dutch farms have. And that is all very important to me. But at the same time, we are trying to kind of blaze our own trail, I would say. We're doing things a little bit differently to previous generations. So the farm has gone from being very much focused on sort of primary agriculture. So when I was growing up, we grew grapes and we sold the grapes to the local co-op, which was Simonsvlei. We had a dairy and we sold milk to, I guess what is now Parmalat. We grew tobacco and we sold tobacco to the Ruperts. So there was a lot of agriculture, but it wasn't really kind of value adding. And when I joined the farm in the late, when was it? Sort of around about 1998. And when I got married to Anetta, which was in 2000, by then I had kind of fallen for the wine bug, and I decided that we should stop selling grapes and start making wine. And that's kind of, in a nutshell, sort of when it all started.
But you studied at Elsenburg.
I studied, actually my first degree I got a degree in philosophy and sociology. Those were my two majors. So I left Stellenbosch after 3 years.
Do you know who else did that? Sorry. You know who else did that? We had Johan on, and he also went to the whole sustainable wine farming. So you philosophers start to change the world.
Yeah, well, he went a step further. I think he actually did his honors. I just sort of ended up with this, the piece of paper in my pocket, but not a lot to do with it. You know what I mean? So that's my first degree, and then after working for a while, I went to Elsenburg and studied winemaking at Elsenburg. And I did a couple of harvests overseas. I worked in France and I worked in California as well. So the bug, sort of truly, bit pretty hard. And so then I started in 1999 at Joostenberg. There were obviously vineyards on the farm at the time. We were selling grapes. We took the old dairy, one of the old sheds, and we converted it into a winery. And without much of a business plan or, really very few resources, we just started making wine, just kind of jumped in and got it done. I drove around to some of the bigger wineries, and I bought old equipment. So I bought a destemmer from Kraal, and I bought an old press from Rist and Vrede, and I bought a whole lot of old barrels from, I think, Glencarlo at the time, and just kind of started. And then kind of once we'd started making wine, I think the next kind of big thing to happen was the decision to go organic. And I was in a tasting group with a whole lot of friends that are also winemakers, and as I was tasting wine, I realized that a lot of these like great French wines and some of the German Rieslings, a lot of them were either organic or biodynamic, and that kind of piqued my interest. I kind of in about 2005 decided to go the whole kind of organic route. So I guess we make kind of quite an eclectic range of wines, and the emphasis is definitely, I say organic, and it is certified and it ticks all the boxes, but the whole idea really is that wine is this product that that kind of speaks of the earth, and the roots are in the earth, and it tastes like the place that it's coming from. And for me, organics is a tool or a kind of a route or philosophy that helps me kind of really maintain and explore this link with the earth. So the very basic idea is that the less kind of chemicals and all kinds of stuff you add to your soil, the more the wine eventually is going to taste kind of unique to that particular site. So it's
and there's, I mean, I read somewhere that your philosophy, and it's if you're going to take from the earth, leave it in a better place than when you arrived, you know.
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely believe in you know, in that, and I think, you know, a lot of us do, that we want to leave the earth a better place than it was when we started working it. And luckily for me, I've kind of got this unique position where my career or my industry kind of actually allows me to take that route. So instead of having to just in my free time eat organic products and maybe hang out in game reserves, and I can actually, my whole life is sort of involved in that route. Although I'm kind of saying all this, I don't want to, it's not like a big bunny hugger thing. I don't want people to buy the wine because it's, you know, organic. The idea really is that it helps me make wine which is really true or authentic. I really want, I strive for authenticity in wine, and you know, the wine's got to taste good. People must still buy it and drink it because it tastes good. I mean, that's the first hurdle. But the organic thing just kind of helps me get there.
And coupled with which, because as you said earlier, you were selling grapes, which you start in 2000 with your first vintage, but that doesn't mean those vines are still aged, and they are now, I believe some of them are even heritage. So you've got all those vines producing beautiful wines that are concentrated and
So the oldest vineyard on the farm was planted in 1982. So that my father planted that vineyard, and we still have those vines. So so 82, I was actually looking up the other day what happened in 1982, and that was the year that Michael Jackson released Thriller. and it was, I think Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands in 1982. And the other thing I saw was that the man of the year in Time magazine was the computer. So that was 1982. I don't know, sometimes you think of the 80s as being just the other day, but I guess it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I try to forget some of the things we wore, and so just to explain to people where Joostenberg is. It's on the N1, and at the R304 turnoff, you can come off the highway and you can go left or you can go right. And I just want on the right is your little Joostenberg, which is your bistro, and on the left is your winery and your plants.
Yeah, so look, the farm was basically kind of intersected by the highway at some stage. So if you exit the N1 highway onto the R304, the R304 is the Malmesbury or Tyrrel Stellenbosch road. If you turn left, then almost immediately there's a dirt road on your right, and that's how you get to the winery. If you turn right towards Stellenbosch after the exit, then a little bit further on your left is the farm stall, where the Joostenberg deli and bistro is. So we are on either side of the highway, and the winery is you know, it's fairly small and it's a bit of a private kind of setup. We are open on Sundays when the Kraal restaurant is open, but if you go to the deli and bistro, that's open 7 days a week, and all our wines are for sale there. So that's a little bit more kind of accessible.
I'm just going to try to do this so people can see. I'll try. No, so there's the N1, and you'll see on both sides. So the Joostenberg winery. So I've on a couple of occasions taken some of the tour guests through Escape and Explore to Tyrrel, and often he's not there. So he just gives me the password to his gate, and we go into, I think that's the shed that you're talking about where wines originally were made. And there's a gramophone there, so you can listen to the old tunes.
Yeah.
Look on the wines there, it's beautiful. And it was where the Kraal is now, and we'll talk about all this just now. That's where the first, well, my first book vein was. I don't know if it was the first one, but it's in that little area there, and it was eye-opening.
Yeah. So the Kraal, I mean, maybe, yeah, we kind of speaking about quite a lot of subjects, but my family it's very much kind of an extended kind of family business. So myself and my wife Annetta, we run the winery together and the vineyards together. Then my sister Susan, she has her and her husband have a restaurant called the Joostenberg Bistro, which is, you know, at the farm store part. And then she has a second restaurant at the winery called the Kraal. And that was, you know, it's been going for 2 summers, and it's like a special Sunday lunch restaurant. And the idea is that it's a fixed menu, and so you don't have any choices. You kind of get whatever they cook on that Sunday, and she uses you know, produce from the area. A lot of it's actually from the farm. So we've got a little vegetable and herb garden. We also farm with some sheep, and then she tries to use, you know, produce from the local farmers. And it's a 3-course set menu. And yeah, the idea is you sit outside and you just have a nice long Sunday lunch. That's the whole idea with the Kraal. Yeah. And then my father actually has a butchery on the farm as well, on the Stellenbosch side, and that's the Joostenberg butchery. And you might see some of his products in the local kind of spas and so on. And then I've got another sister, Nikki, who's also involved in the family business. She runs the deli part of the business. Yeah, so there's a lot going on. And then actually, I haven't even mentioned it, but Annetta, my wife, also has a flour business, a cut flour business. So yeah, there's just a lot happening on the farm.
So, it sounds confusing, but sorry, my computer's doing something. It sounds confusing, but it's actually pretty awesome. And this is where you've got to split the winery side, which is, I think that's where the veggies are, that's where the flour are, and that's where the winemaking in the Kraal is. And then the bistro, and you go to that bistro, perfect place to meet, and it's got nice lawns, a little bit of a dam, and then the butchery. Go back to Joostenberg and the butchery, because there's a history there. I think you guys and even
well, historically, so when my grandfather, he came back from the Second World War. He had got captured in North Africa, and it took about a year for the servicemen to get back from Europe back to the farm. And so what he did was he spent about a year, or I think it was about 8 months, traveling around England with and he stayed with his fellow POWs. A lot of them were English officers that had farms in the English countryside. And during these trips around the English countryside, he, I don't know, kind of fell in love with sort of proper pig farming. And when he came back in 1946, he started farming with pigs. And that actually carried on until, you know, fairly recently. But so on the back of the pig farming operation, my father then started a butchery. We now buy most of our pigs from neighboring farms. But yeah, there's a long history of kind of pig farming, basically from 1946 until about 2010. Yeah, we farmed with pigs.
Oh, that's cool.
And there's an image on one of the labels. I don't know if on the Myburgh Brothers label of my grandfather.
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go. Can you see the little pigs? There they are. Okay, a bit difficult to see, but and maybe that's like takes me to the Myburgh Brothers wines. Can I talk about that a bit?
Yeah, go wherever it's going. I want to talk about the Myburgh Brothers. I want to talk about the Joostenberg wines and the ranges in there. Then we can get on to MAN and Lievland and all of that.
Yeah. Okay. So Myburgh Brothers is a range of wines that we started about 3 years ago, and I was kind of sitting in the old house on the farm and looking through some of the old journals and some of the old certificates and things, and I found a certificate from the 1904 Cape Agricultural Show, and the Myburgh Brothers had won second prize for their Hermitage. So Hermitage is the old name for Cinsault in South Africa. And that kind of just piqued my interest a bit. And I started looking through, some of the other old journals, and I started kind of unraveling the history of wine growing at Joostenberg. And I spoke to my father a bit, and I realized that it's kind of a story I didn't mention earlier, but up until 1947, there was a working winery on the farm, and Cinsault or Hermitage was one of the grapes that these guys worked with. So I took kind of all those stories and built a kind of a range of wines around it. So I called the wines Myburgh Brothers. So I named them after not only myself and my brother, but also my great grandfather and his brother that used to farm together. And then I specially kind of selected some of the grapes that they worked with, and I'm kind of making wines using those grapes. So Cinsault is one of them. We've got a Cinsault, and then the other one which I'd like to mention is Muscat d'Alexandrie, also known, which is Hanepoort. So we also make a Hanepoort, a dry style of Muscat d'Alexandrie, which is pretty unusual in the Cape. But I think it's one of those wines that, I don't know, we should be drinking a lot of. It's kind of crazy. It's really refreshing. It's got beautiful aromatics, and it just smells like summer. It's like childhood memories, sweet Hanepoort grapes. I mean, what more could you want? So that's the inspiration behind the Myburgh Brothers wines. And actually, I've looked even further back in those journals, and I've gone back to like the 1760s, and there was actually a working winery on the farm, and back then they made Muscat d'Alexandrie. So that's how kind of old it is. They also made Pontac. That was the red wine they made. And it's pretty cool actually. So Muscat d'Alexandrie is named after the city of Alexandria in Egypt, and they reckon it's the oldest Vitis vinifera wine grape that is still being used. So it's like, way older than Chenin Blanc and Chardonnay and all these kind of newfangled things. It's kind of got this very ancient history. And history is kind of fascinating. I mean, we only make probably 2,500 or 3,000 bottles of each wine. So it's not a big business, but it's just kind of like a fun thing we do on the side. So that's Myburgh Brothers.
Don't you have a Viognier?
Yeah, I've got a Viognier as well. Yeah. So that's obviously not something they would have worked with. But they did a lot of interesting things. They also kind of made butter, which they trucked into Cape Town. And so I just thought, well, if they were alive today, they would also be trying these newer grape varieties like Viognier. So I make a Viognier.
And these grapes, the Cinsault and the Muscat, are they from the farm or close by?
So they actually, so that's another little leg of the story. So these brothers, the one owned Joostenberg, and the other brother owned a few other farms in the area. And I've actually gone looking at those farms. So the farms that are not, they're now neighboring farms. And that's where I get the grapes. So I'm kind of trying to bring the whole story together.
Oh, that's cool,
Yeah. So with Joostenberg, I really focus on kind of estate wines. So it's wines from my own property. I farm all the grapes. And then with Myburgh Brothers, I'm working with some neighboring vineyards, which kind of fit into that whole story.
But that's wasn't the farm bigger then, back then?
Yeah, no, it was way bigger. I mean,
so it would have been almost as if it was from the Joostenberg farm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's maybe just talk about the Joostenberg range, and then I want to get onto the MAN and the Lievland and all these other projects that you're involved in.
Yeah.
So
okay. So you.
Let's just talk about the terroir there, and because sometimes people do want to know, why is that a good region for the varieties you make? What varieties are you making, and why?
Yeah. Okay, so we're very much kind of almost like an in-between area. So the Simonsberg mountain range is actually fairly close. So as the crow flies, we're only about, I would say, probably 4 or 5 kilometers from, for example, Warwick and Kanonkop, which are all Stellenbosch properties. So we're quite close to Stellenbosch. The first Durbanville vineyard is about 7 or 8 kilometers away. And then, from the farm, you can see, Paarl Mountain. So we kind of in between a whole lot of, areas. I mean, I would loosely define our kind of climatically, we're probably one of the cooler parts of the Paarl appellation. Paarl being probably one of the warmer, appellations in South Africa. Soil-wise, we have both Malmesbury shale and we have decomposed granite. So we've got a kind of a combination of the two. Grape-wise, I mean, we found that what grows really well is good old-fashioned Chenin Blanc. It's definitely a major focus for us. It's a grape that does well. We've got beautiful old vineyards. Other white grapes, that we grow on the farm are Viognier. We don't have a lot of it, but we have a little bit of it. We've got a little bit of Roussanne, which is sort of a more, I would say, Mediterranean style white grape. So that's the focus on the whites.
Those are good blenders, actually.
We blend them. So sometimes you kind of define what you're doing by almost what you aren't doing. So if I look at our property, I've always said it's got a tradition of dry farming, although it's warm. It's not a spot for growing great Sauvignon Blanc or great Pinot Noir or great Chardonnay. It's got a coastal influence, and at the same time it's fairly warm. So our long-term focus is definitely on grapes that do well in kind of Mediterranean climates. So I'm trying to move away from, Sauvignons, Chardonnays, just Cabernet focus, although we do make a Cabernet. We've got quite a lot of Syrah, we've got Mourvèdre, we've got some Grenache, Touriga Nacional, which is a Portuguese grape. So we kind of, I don't really have this very strong winemaking, heritage to fall back on. So although we have a lot of history, the history isn't really in kind of fine winemaking. So I'm trying to kind of use quite a broad, kind of go in there with a lot of options. And I'm hoping in my generation, we'll figure out where we should focus. Does it make sense, Harry?
this whole thing, this Love and Time of Corona Story Cellars, and I think following some advice was just start messy, and it'll become what it'll become. But if you don't start, it's not going to. You're going to wait years, and then you still haven't started.
Yeah.
It's just
but I would say definitely. Sorry, Chenin Blanc and old vine Chenin Blanc is a major focus on the white side.
You have like 5 or 6 different Chenins.
Yeah, well, we've got only sort of 3 that we really focus on properly. We've got an unoaked Chenin, just called Joostenberg Chenin Blanc.
Yeah.
We've got a old vine Chenin, which is made in so it's a single vineyard Chenin, and it's fermented in a combination of oak and also concrete, and we call that the Achteros, and that's got quite a story to it.
Well, you must tell us.
Okay. Okay. Well, in the old days, when people worked with oxen, they would have a team of oxen to pull either the plows or the wagons, and the smallest or the least experienced ox would always be in the kind of the achter. It would be the achteros, so it would be behind in the team. It would take the hind position, and as it got older and stronger, it would work its way to the front of the team. So you've got the saying in Afrikaans, "Achteros kom ook in die kraal," which means the hind ox will get there eventually. And the kind of figurative meaning is like, you might not be very good at something, or it could be that you're training to run, or you studying, but you kind of find you like a little bit slow and you're not taking it in. But as long as you just kind of stick to it, eventually you'll get there. So don't give up. So that's the story. Achteros kom ook in die kraal. And the vineyard that we're using, it's the oldest vineyard on the farm. And for the first 20 years or so, we thought, okay, we're getting grapes from this vineyard, but you know, it's Chenin Blanc, whatever. We sold it to the local park. As the vineyard got older, we realized actually this is probably one of our favorite vineyards. And eventually, when the vineyard turned 32, sorry, so that was 2014, we made a single vineyard wine from it. So it took us 32 years to kind of realize the value of this vineyard. So Achteros kom ook in die kraal. So we call that wine the Achteros. So that's the story.
Oh, that's cool.
Kind of long.
But,
and then the third Chenin Blanc we focus on actually is a noble late harvest, a botrytis Chenin Blanc, and that's also from a single vineyard, and it's kind of a more south-facing vineyard, and every year we get this mist coming in from Table Bay, and the grapes kind of get this fungi that grow on them called botrytis cinerea. And it concentrates the sugar and the flavors in the grapes, and they just become intensely sweet. And we pick these grapes. It's a very selective process, and we make a dessert wine out of it called the Noble Late Harvest.
This Noble Late Harvest is one of the flagships. In fact, when I was speaking to David, he said, "No, you must have the Noble Late Harvest." And I spoke to Tyrrel, and he says it's not in the box. But the Noble Late Harvest, just to let people know that Botrytis cinerea is a rot, and it can form in two ways. It can be a grey rot, which destroys your grapes, or it can be this lovely Noble Late rot. But for Noble Late rot, it needs to be when the grapes are ripe, and you need mist, and then that mist needs to dry, and it needs to come again in the mornings, and then needs to dry. And where you are, you get a lot of morning mist.
Yeah. So it's actually, it's fascinating. I don't know, for those of you that collect mushrooms, so it's normally like around about kind of Easter that we start getting a lot of mist in Cape Town. And in the years that we have great mushrooms, we also have great botrytis on, in the vineyards. And it's, I mean, I've tried various vineyards on Joostenberg, but we've always come back to the same vineyard. So it's just this one vineyard that seems to get these intense kind of botrytis infections. And I don't know, it's kind of crazy, because if you look at the grapes when it's happening, it's you pretty much from one day to the next, you'll walk in the vineyards and find the botrytis growing, and it looks a bit like, kind of almost like bread mold on your grapes. And when I first saw it, I was like, can this be true? Like, really? Like, how do you make wine out of this stuff? It's and still sometimes I show people photos, of these botrytis infections on the grapes, and they like think, geez, I don't know, how am I going to drink that stuff? But
I'm going to try to show you a picture now.
Okay, yeah. And what we do is we've got like a whole team. So we normally pick with, probably between 8 and 12 people. And they've been doing the same thing since, 2000 was our first harvest of the Noble Late. So by now they kind of know what they're looking for. There we go. Yeah. So, I mean, it's difficult to believe that you actually make wine out of that, but so what it does is the fungi sends its little roots, the mycelia, break through the skin and start feeding off the moisture inside the berry. And you pretty much in the space of a few hours, you get this incredible kind of concentration of sugar, and the taste of the grapes sort of also changes. It starts getting a sort of a marmalade-y, apricot kind of taste. So it's something quite special. And we need to, normally when you make wine, you kind of almost pick every single bunch on the vines, and you bring it in and you make a batch of wine. With the Noble Late, we sometimes do, up to 6 or 7 selections on one vineyard. So we'll walk through, you'll pick a bunch here, then walk a couple of vines, pick another bunch, and end up with maybe 500 kilograms or, 1,000 kilograms at most. And then you've got to wait for a week until we get, there are more infections. And then you go through and you do another picking. So the whole thing takes like
Do you start
ages.
making those wines then and then make another batch and blend them, or do you wait?
We'll end the harvest with at least 5 or 6 batches of Noble Late, and they'll end up with varying degrees of alcohol and sugar. By the time we blend them all, typically there's about 13% alcohol and about 130 grams of residual sugar. Yeah. So it's quite an interesting process, actually.
Tyrrel, there's a question here from Rob. He says, driving in from Paarl on the south side, there's some bush vines near Hercules Pillar Road. It looks neglected. Do you know about those ones? What are yours?
No. So driving from Paarl?
On the Hercules Pillar Road. Near the Hercules Pillar Road. Let me open up Rob. Rob.
No, if you're driving on the N1,
yes,
and just as you come past the berry guy on your, if you're coming from Paarl, the berry guy's on your right.
Yes.
That new thing, and then on the left-hand side, I've seen like for years, because I go to Worcester a lot. There's just like a whole lot of bush wines kind of.
Oh, yes, I know exactly where that is. Yeah, no, that's been abandoned. So that's on a farm called Weltevreden. And yeah, that vineyard's pretty much been abandoned for quite a while.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately. I think they used to deliver those grapes to Kulenov. And actually, actually in the winelands now, driving around, just because of the stresses on the wine industry, and also the, I don't know, I guess there's more value in selling your property sometimes than growing grapes. You'll find actually there are a few neglected vineyards here or there. It's kind of a little bit sad, but yeah.
And I don't think this lockdown is going to help that.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
There's a question from Kath.
Okay.
He says, sugars and Noble Late too high for wild yeast?
No, actually, we do specifically, we do all our fermentations at Joostenberg, we do wild yeast. I don't use not even a drop of yeast in the winery, and we haven't for about 10 years. But the Noble Late, you actually want you don't want the fermentation to be too strong, because you want the fermentation to stop. So yeah, we definitely use wild yeast with our Noble Late harvest. And one of the strange things is that so I don't know how scientific this is. It's just something I've observed, but our fermentations over the years have produced more alcohol with the Noble Late. So it's almost as if the yeast strain has become kind of stronger and stronger. So in the early days, we used to reach about 11.5% alcohol with our Noble Late, and we'd end up with 130 grams of residual sugar. Now we're getting up to sort of 13.5, 14 some years. Anyway, it's one of those kind of interesting things. There's a whole kind of microbial world that we don't see. that's kind of, evolves and changes, and obviously the different, yeast strains involved, and it's kind of interesting.
My neighbor next door is studying mushrooms and how mushrooms communicate and plants communicate through mushrooms and how the world communicates through mushrooms, basically.
Yeah. So that's one of the kind of going back to the organic farming. It's your roots don't they do take up moisture directly from the soil, but the minerals and the nutrients that they take up normally are taken up through microbes, through other microbial activity. So that's why you need a lot of life around your roots, especially lots of yeast and fungi, mycorrhiza. There's kind of a lot happening down there.
Let's go into some of these stories. So I'm drinking a Phillip Albert. It's a Cab Sauv.
Yes, okay. It's Phillip Albert. Yeah. So Phillip Albert. So the original, my great grandfather that arrived from Meerlist, his name was Phillip Albert, actually Philippus Albertus, but I reckon that's a little bit long for a name on a label. And over the generations, there's always been a Phillip Albert farming at Joostenberg. So my grandfather was Phillip Albert, my father's Phillip Albert, my brother's Phillip Albert, I've got a cousin Phillip Albert, a nephew Phillip Albert. And it's the one wine in our kind of lineup, which is sort of quite a traditional wine. I think there's a great history of Cabernet in Stellenbosch and Paarl. And so with the Phillip Albert, I wanted to kind of pay homage to kind of the history of the farm, and also to kind of the history of Cabernet in Paarl and Stellenbosch. And it's just made in a very kind of traditional way, where some of my other wines are perhaps a little bit more new wave. So it gets fermented, and then we mature it in small French oak barrels for 2 years. So it's got those kind of the berry and all that good Cabernet stuff, and it's got a little bit of savoriness. It's got some cigar box notes. It's got a dry tannin that goes on forever. And it's the kind of wine you can age.
It's such a classic cab. Seriously, it's definitely up there with the good cabs that are coming from Stellenbosch, as you say, from Paarl.
Yeah.
There's another story. Fairhead, the Joostenberg Fairhead.
Yeah. So the Fairhead is, my mother was a Fairhead, so that was her maiden surname. And when she arrived on the farm looked very different to how it looks now. It was, the gardens weren't very established, and it was sort of quite dry and dusty and almost treeless. I think that a lot of farming on the go, but I think just there hadn't been a lot of gardening. And she absolutely loved gardening. And she created the most amazing gardens on the farm, even though she was working full time and she had 4 children to look after. She somehow found the time to kind of really follow this passion, this gardening passion. And so that kind of inspired the wine, and the wine, the Fairhead. There's the bottle. So what I'm trying to do with the Fairhead is I'm looking at all the different white grapes that we have on the farm, which is, at the moment, we have 3, but I've got a couple more on the way. And kind of inspired by her gardens and these amazing flower arrangements she had, I'm kind of trying to make a wine which is a little bit of exotic, almost a little bit kind of colorful, and it's got influences of Viognier, which is kind of quite peachy. It's got the Roussanne, which is kind of got almost like a little bit more of an elderberry kind of characteristic, and then the acidity and the structure from the Chenin. So yeah, it's kind of like when you make a flower arrangement and you have your greenery and your roses and all the different flowers. That's the kind of inspiration behind the fair head.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I kind of like each wine to have a story. They're all from Joostenberg, but each wine is like, one of our children. It's got its own character and its own story.
And the Piano Man, the Viognier?
Yeah, the Piano Man. So that's we had a winemaker at Joostenberg called Miku Narunski. It worked here for a couple of years, and he was actually a concert pianist. And he kind of quite liked the more kind of full-bodied, riper style of Viognier. So that's where that came from. Yeah.
Cool. And I don't know, I don't understand Afrikaans what Kalgat means.
So yeah, we've got this little. I haven't really even covered it now, but we've got we call the small batch collection. So, geez, Harry, I'm giving you so much information about a wine. I don't think anyone's going to remember even one of these things. But anyway, the small batch collection is it's kind of this little experimental range. So I just make one barrel at a time, and typically a barrel is about 300 bottles. And the Kalgat Steen is made without using any sulfur or absolutely any additives. So we basically just take the grapes as they are, we ferment them and put it into a bottle. So Kalgat means naked in Afrikaans. So the idea is it's kind of a naked wine. You're basically just getting the grapes and nothing else. And this whole thing about not using sulfur in wine is something that's becoming more and more relevant. And there are two reasons, and I kind of almost prefer the second reason. The first reason is some people are allergic to sulfur. And I find that it's normally these kind of really young Sauvignon Blancs that have a lot of sulfur that people are allergic to. I'm not trying to diss Sauvignon Blanc, but I think, most traditionally made wines don't have a lot of sulfur, but still there are some people that are allergic to sulfur. But the second reason is as soon as you make wine without sulfur, especially during the fermentation process, you've got a whole nother world, a whole nother spectrum of aromas and flavors that you don't normally get in wine. It seems to appear. So it's quite amazing. I didn't kind of understand it at first. But it just,
do you think the sulfur sort of kills off some maybe of the other wilder yeasts that
yeah, so what happens is, so the way we get taught to make wine at university or at Elsenburg is as soon as your grapes come in, you add a little bit of sulfur, and that's like a sterilizing process. Then you press the grapes and you add a little bit more sulfur to the juice, and then the juice has to clarify overnight. And that's another little kind of sterilization process. And then you add a commercial yeast to the juice to start the fermentation. And this commercial yeast has been selected because it's got a very specific attribute that it can give to the wine. So for a Sauvignon Blanc, you'll use one yeast. For a Chenin Blanc, you'll use a different yeast. Anyway, so as soon as you start working without sulfur and without any yeast, yeah, there's just another spectrum of aromas and flavors.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, the other thing with the Kalgat is we also ferment the grapes on the skins.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of an orange wine.
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of wine. So let's just. I just want to
say that.
Philippa, go, Philippa, go.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask a question about yeast. How does that work? Do you have like a chemist you speak to, or bakery, or you go, that is the particular yeast I want? I mean, I've always heard about yeast and all of that, but how does that actually happen? How does it actually work?
Yeah.
What are they called? Are they given good names or?
Yeah, so it's actually, so you probably get, I would say, at least 6 or 7 suppliers in the wine industry. And one of them is Anchor Yeast, which, you can buy Anchor Yeast when you for baking bread and so on. And what they've done is they've gone into different winemaking areas in the world, and they've identified yeast that you find there, and they've worked out what that yeast will, the characteristics will give to a wine. Anyway, so they isolate the yeast and they multiply it in a laboratory. So all I do is I have reps knocking on the door all the time, and they say, geez, Tyrrel, you're making Chenin Blanc. We've got this amazing yeast called, I don't know, NW312. And if you use this NW312, your Chenin Blanc will taste like guavas. You know, you've got to give it a go. And then the next day, another rep will knock on my door and, you know, come with another. And then, so you can, it's like you just order them. They drive into Stellenbosch or Paarl, and they are, you know, suppliers that have outlets, or they deliver to you. It's amazingly widespread. It's just, and it will go as far as, you know, the rep will say, you know, well, oh, there we go. There are all the different kinds. You know, the rep will say, well, in Chile, they've been making this incredible Sauvignon Blanc using, I don't know, you know, this particular yeast. You've got to try it. It's won so many awards. And, you know, Robert Parker loves it, and this, and yeah, so it's, it's kind of amazing. And that's exactly what we're trying not to do at Joostenberg. I'm really, because I also find that sometimes those really kind of intense, fruity wines, the character all comes from the yeast. And a year down the line or 2 years down the line, you taste the wine and that's all disappeared. And then there's nothing more to the wine. It's like, okay, well, I don't taste or smell gooseberries anymore. And it's kind of acid and not much else, you know? So yeah, I don't know. I shouldn't be dissing these things, but I am.
Let's quickly summarize. So we've gone through detailed wines, but in Joostenberg you have the estate wines.
Yeah.
Then you've got your Myburgh Brothers range. You've got small batch range.
Yes.
There's two little J's. What are those little J's? Those food wines.
Sure. Where did you see that?
I don't know. Is that ages ago?
Yeah, that was ages ago. It's the little J. It's a blended white and a blended red. We don't even really sell those in South Africa. So
okay.
I've got an import that I made specially. I made those wines for the guy in New York.
I know that in the Spookvein box, we were getting the small batch wines and they were incredible. But now what I'm interested in is MAN Vintners.
Yeah.
And more recently Lievland, and I think they're linked. Can you just give us a little bit, I know we're sitting at 6 o'clock now, but just a little bit more about those.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, I'll go on to, so my cousin, sorry, not my cousin, my wife, Anetta, her cousin, their family owned Star Condé wines in Stellenbosch. So her cousin is Marie Condé and Marie's husband is Jose Condé. Anyway, so Jose and myself started MAN Family Wines in about 2002, and we named it after, my brother was involved, we named it after our wives. So it's Marie, Anetta, and Nikki, M-A-N. And we make a range of kind of what we call, you know, varietal, great value wines. And we're working with farmers in the kind of Achterparel area. So the Paderbach winery around that area, and we're making these wines, and it's really always been mainly kind of export focused. We sell most of them in Japan and the USA. So that's MAN Family Wines. But you can find sort of at Topsits bars, and we do have quite a few restaurant listings. So you'll see those wines. And I mean, out of all those wines, actually, I would say for me, the Chenin Blanc is probably the absolute killer wine. I mean, it's really a great wine. So that's MAN. And then Lievland is a property next door to kind of Kanonkorp, Laibach and Warwick. So it's on the Simonsberg. And the MAN family wines as a business. We bought that property 3.5 years ago, and we're busy kind of trying to resuscitate, the whole Lievland brand. So I think for those of you that were kind of buying wine, I guess right up until probably the late 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, I mean, Lievland was really a Stellenbosch property with an amazing reputation. And then it kind of went through a little bit of a dip. But it's this beautiful site. It's kind of like a sort of an amphitheater shape. Slopes go up to about 350, 400 meters above sea level. And it's just a beautiful property. And we planting new vineyards. We've rebuilt the winery. So that's awesome. A whole kind of long-term project.
And that's such good terroir, as you say. There's some stellar wineries there.
Yeah.
I know Annette Zonia. I just want to say how's it to her. She's one of the most welcoming people. Whenever I see her, she's so welcoming. When we come to Houston, we came to the Kraal, to the second or third opening of the Kraal, and whenever we, so that's really cool. And I didn't actually know that much. I only found out about MAN and Lievland like yesterday or the day before. So I'm quite impressed. I don't know where you get all the time for all this stuff.
Well, the wine industry is, I mean, it's a super fun, business to be in, but sometimes you need your finger in a couple of pots just to, I don't know, make a nice income.
Yeah, I mean, so when we open up, we're going to come visit, and we definitely listen to your gramophone and taste all your Chenins.
Okay, great.
The one time we went there, we had really high-end guests, and we found Adam, and he popped in, and so we did a tasting with his, because we've got your wines on as our crazies in the tour bus.
Yeah.
And so we tasted his Chenin, and we tasted Artie's Chenin and your Chenin, and I don't think it was objective in his tasting.
Yeah, well, Harry, I must say, I'm, our tasting room is not a big commercial kind of tasting room, but I'm like so happy to take the time, to have any visitors. So, anyone can kind of send me an email and say, look, I'm coming to Stellenbosch. Can I just come and see you for half an hour? And then we'll walk through the winery and, open some bottles, and I'll show you around. That's kind of the way we work at Joostenberg. It's not a kind of a Boschendal or a Speed or that's trying to kind of keep things very intimate.
And they are. Maybe what you can do, Tyrrel, is tell them about how you get the wine. So and that box you put together.
Yeah, well, look, the box is there's a little kind of mixed pack that I've got available on our e-shop. And it's 6 bottles. It's 3 Myburgh Brothers wines and 3 Joostenberg wines. And you just go on to joostenberg.co.za, and we've got a wine shop, so you can order it there. Okay, sorry, Annette wants to say hi.
So, hi, Harry.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, and you?
I'm very well, thank you.
I'm struggling with my connection at home. Sorry, Sorry to interrupt.
So that's where, so you can buy it on our e-shop, and we do sell in Cape Town. There's I sent you that list. There are a few outlets. There's Wine Cellar as well. Wine Cellar stocks all our wines.
But I think the best thing is if people are a bit patient, just to order it through your platform.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's the best way. That's our best margin as well.
Does it include your sweet wine too?
Yes.
Yay!
No, we can definitely buy it. And actually, the sweet wine, I do keep older vintages. So it's not on the shop, but I've actually, the sweet wine, I've got like probably about 10 vintages. I don't have a lot of it, but if anyone's interested in trying older sweet wines, and I think the older sweet wines are really great, because it goes from being this sort of overly fruity, kind of quite intense experience to a little bit more of a kind of fruit friendly kind of wine. The older vintages, I think it's like one of those like gems that we forget about. You know, you age your red wines, but the sweet wines you can definitely age as well.
Yeah, I think sweet wine, sadly, we don't drink enough of. There's always inevitably that thing you have at the end of drinking champagne, white wine and red wine, and then you have an awful head the next day, and they always blame the sweet wine. But actually, you really spend time on sweet wine, it's phenomenal. I just sadly don't drink enough of it. So I always love it when wineries do sweet wines.
Yeah, and you can actually, I mean, if you have a group for dinner, 4 or 5, whatever the size of the party, when people walk through the door, actually the first thing you should do is just give them a little, because it kind of lifts the sugar lifts your energy levels. Maybe you've had a hard day at work, and then it, the alcohol obviously relaxes you a little bit, and then you finish the bottle with your dessert or with the cheese course.
I'll just say something. Michael Fidgen said to us that it's our national duty to drink a sweet wine every day because it's such a difficult product to make. So now we do. We'll try to.
Okay.
I was taught when I was learning about wine that you must have a bottle of bubbly and a bottle of sweet in your fridge, because you're either happy or you're sad. And if you're happy, you need to celebrate with the bubbly. But if you're sad, you need to drink the sweet until you're happy. And so then when you're happy, you can celebrate with the bubbly.
I like that.
There's just in terms of the location of the Kraal and the winery, and that it's right as you leave Stellenbosch. So it's so easy to slip onto the road and get back into town. So it's actually a beautiful way to spend a Sunday. And the Bistro as well. A lot of the time when I'm having meetings, I have meetings at the Bistro just because it's so quick in and quick out, you know, if you're coming from Cape Town side.
A question on Lievland. I see that they made a Edel, you know, that the one that they freeze the grapes. Is that seems a bit strange?
Yeah, that was just a kind of a one-off. That, you know, we haven't done that again. I mean, that was way back. I think, was that in the sometime in the early 90s or?
I just picked up on that. It was a guy called Farquharson. James Farquharson was.
James Farquharson. Yeah. So James is he's kind of my age, and so he was the winemaker after A.B. Bierkes at Lievland. And then he actually helped Reineke Wines. He sort of went into business with Johan Reineke in the early days. Really nice guy. And now he's farming in Kenya.
What's his name? James Ferguson.
Pardon?
Yeah, I know James Ferguson. For those guys, Debbie, he's married to Nicky Alexander. So Nicky Alexander is a very close friend of mine, family friend. And I know James well.
Yeah.
Was there not a Canadian doctor or something that owned that farm or something?
Yeah, it's an American doctor. Well, actually originally from the Eastern Cape, but he kind of spent most of his working life in Massachusetts.
And then, so that was, I remember going up there quite a long time ago. I mean, did they make much of a success of it, or is that where it kind of went downhill?
You know, I think their idea was they wanted to come back to South Africa, and they wanted a sort of a retirement farm, and they didn't have any wine knowledge or wine kind of background, and they basically wanted sort of a going concern, and they wanted to kind of live on the farm and enjoy it. And when they arrived, at that stage, there hadn't been much replanting, so the virus status was quite bad on the farm, and it needed a little bit of TLC, which wasn't really kind of what they had in mind. So it just kind of slid a little bit. Although, you know, they had a great life there. I mean, I think they enjoyed the property, but as a wine producing property, it didn't perhaps get the attention that it needed, I would say. I'm being
Tyrrel? Tyrrel?
Yeah. Yes.
Am I on? Yeah, just want to say I actually agree with Philippa about the sweet wines. I think we really haven't explored that. It's delicious with a Roquefort cheese or something. You can just make a day of sweet wine. So I love that, and I want to try your botrytis. But the other thing I wanted to know was, you talk about your dad, the butcher. Does he do any smoking or curing, or has he got anything like that with his pig farming?
No, look, I mean, he does very basic curing, like with bacon, but it's we don't do any of the sort of European, dry curing styles. Unfortunately, I mean, I think it's something we talk about quite often as a next project. And my brother-in-law is Christophe de Haas. He's a French chef, and he's actually got quite a lot of kind of experience with all kinds of food, and it's something we talk about quite often, but it isn't something we've done yet. And I must admit, one of my greatest loves in the world, besides for my wife, is Spanish cured ham, Iberico. I think it's just it's the most amazing thing in the world. So I'd love to.
Yeah, I would love you to do it, I must say, because I don't think there are enough sources of that kind of thing. And we were involved at one stage with importing Italian produce, and the choices that you have and the amount that there is we just don't know about it in this country. You get a few deli stock it, but not nearly enough. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Oh, well, I wish you luck with that.
Thank you.
Cool. Any more questions? Is that Chris? He's linked with the Glenelly, am I right?
Yeah. So Christophe is he's got a restaurant at Glenelly called the MAN Bistro.
That's right.
And then he is involved also at Joostenberg and kind of directly at the Kraal, but the MAN Bistro is his main.
No, that's
his main.
Yeah. He's a talented guy.
Yeah.
Tyrrel, I see on your website you've got some sort of cottages or something like that on the farm. I take it those aren't open yet, but how many have you got?
Yeah, I must. We've actually this week we made a decision to just to kind of stop with our guest house business, and we're going to just get long-term tenants now. So we don't have a reopening, I'm afraid. The farm is absolutely beautiful, but it's almost like a farm within the city. We have, a highway going fairly close by, and, the farm is busy. So the cottages were quite successful, but I think now with the numbers in tourism, being depleted, and we've decided just to kind of simplify our lives a little bit. We had guests kind of every weekend and over the holiday periods, and the guest house was part of our home, and we've just we've moved on from there.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Tyrrel. Jim here.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the first wine that really got me very excited about Joostenberg, and that was Bakermat.
Yes.
I joined your conference here because of certain glitches I have in the countryside a bit late, so you might have mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
But I think that's the first wine. That's where my love affair with Joostenberg started. Won't you just briefly tell us about where it's come from?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned this.
Yeah, I must tell you, I've got some fantastic vintages, and opening them after about 8-9 years, and they're doing very, very well.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Because actually, I haven't mentioned Bakermat, and Bakermat is our flagship red. It's our most important wine in our lineup. So the idea with Bakermat, first of all, the name Bakermat is it's a Dutch word, or it is an Afrikaans language as well, and it means the home of, or the center of something. So you would say Johannesburg is die Bakermat van die goudbedryf, or Stellenbosch is the Bakermat of the wine industry. Anyway, so Joostenberg is the home of our family, and this wine is the center of our kind of winemaking, our winemaking. It's our top red wine. And when I started making the wine, my idea was that it wouldn't be confined by being a Bordeaux blend or by being a Rhone blend. I simply wanted to look at all the vineyards on the farm, and I wanted to make a red wine, which I thought would be the best we could do for that vintage. And you know, the varieties have changed a little bit over the years as I've learned more about the farm. But I've basically settled on Shiraz or Syrah as being, you know, a very important component. Cabernet is a second component, and then Mourvèdre, which is one of the great Châteauneuf de Pape grape varieties, is important. And then in some years we use a little bit of Touriga Nacional, which is a Portuguese grape. So it's kind of a very quirky blend in a way. It doesn't tick many boxes, but I'm kind of realizing more and more that especially Mourvèdre and Syrah work particularly well on the farm. Yeah, and actually the 2014, the 2015, and the 2016 all were top scoring wines in the Wine Magazine Red Blend kind of report. And I think so we've been quite successful with that wine. It's kind of a wine I'm very proud of, the Barkamat. Yeah, and you're right, it can age. You know, the first vintage was in 2001, although we didn't call it Barkamat then. And you know, we've made it every year since then. Well, almost every year. I think we skipped 2 vintages. And every one of those vintages, I can still open a bottle any night and totally enjoy it.
And yeah, I'm going to get some of that. I can't believe we didn't even actually cover it. It's yeah, the bark.
Yeah.
Well, listen, yeah, Tyrrel, thanks so much, for your time, and it's always lekker to chat and catch up.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, absolute pleasure. Yeah.
And we'll be popping along, you know.
Yeah.